Hail Pandawans and journeymen walking that illustrated path. Today we have a little video celebrating the characters created by Robert E. Howard on the, I believe it's 86th or 87th anniversary of his death. If you are not familiar with Robert E. Howard, please do yourself a favor as an artist or just a lover of fantasy writing. Robert E. Howard is the creator of characters like Conan and King Cole, Solomon Kane, Bran McMorn. Good Lord, I can keep on going. Sailor Steve Costigan, Breckenridge Elgins. All these great characters were created by this one guy who died when he was 30 years old, and he left a huge volume of work, all the writings, with Conan and all these other characters. And he did it all, within a few years of him starting to write in the high school days to when he passed away at the age of 30 in Cross Plains, Texas. 1936, if you can believe that. So what was great is I remember being a kid, and I used to go to like the 7-Eleven or Stop and Go, and this was where you got comic books. There were no comic book stores back at that time. They were at news racks. If you're in the East Coast, they got the news racks, but they had the little spinner racks at the 7-Eleven and all that. And that's where I was first introduced to the character Conan from Marvel Comics. Big John Buscema was the artist, and writers like Roy Thomas, and oh man, all the artists back then, Ernie Chan, and oh man, they were just so influential on me growing up as a young kid, seeing this artwork. And this is what really got me started into the fantasy art genre. That and The Hobbit, the animated Hobbit that came out in like 77. So this is just a little quick tribute of his most popular character, and one of my favorites, Conan. My favorite Robert E. Howard character is probably Sailor Steve Costigan, and he's just he's a lot of what my character Grimbeard kind of was is influenced by, and is homage to. But here we're talking about the artist or the writer himself, Robert E. Howard. Growing up back in the days in the 1920s and 30s, he's being a writer in his town of in Texas, and that's like, you're a writer, you need to go out and be wrangling cattle and riding horses and all that. So he got a lot of grief from the people for that, doing what he was doing. That is until he started selling his stories to magazines like Weird Tales and stuff like that, where he was making some good money, and all that by just doing something that he loved, writing. And he would create these worlds, and I'm still blown away. Like, I remember, like I said, being a young kid introduced to this and looking up to this guy. I didn't know a lot about him. We didn't have Wikipedia or anything like that. And it's like, man, this guy's awesome. And, he's 30 years old. Oh my goodness. And what's funny is, being a 6-7-year-old kid reading these comics based off of his characters, being inspired by him, and now, over 50 years old, still influenced by this guy who is 20 something years, my junior, and I'm still reading his work to this day and listening to audiobooks, and just, they still are as inspiring as ever. And I didn't really get, like I was saying, I didn't get introduced to Robert E. Howard's work by his work. It was introduced by Marvel Comics, and then by sneaking into the movie Conan. I think it came out in '82 with Big Arnie in there, and that was my first introduction to his works. And and then I got into Savage Sword of Conan. That has some of the best art in the world. It's got artists like I had mentioned before, John Buscema. It has artists like Ernie Chan, who was a lot of times John Buscema's inker, and then also artists like Rudy Nebres and Alfredo Alcala. Artists, do yourself a favor, look up Alfredo Alcala, and specifically his Conan stuff. He's a great artist. But I would say that rivals the penmanship, the actual work with the pen, not his writing. But that rivals Bernie Wrightson's Frankenstein. If you've ever seen that, that's one of the most influential art books based on the Frankenstein story. But Alfredo Alcala's art is just phenomenal, and the detail and everything that he does is so inspiring. So yeah, that's how I got introduced to his stuff. And then eventually, as I got older and going to bookstores, I would see these Conan books, and they had this killer art on the cover by another legendary artist, Frank Frazetta. So you have basically Frank Frazetta, who, in my opinion, is the grandfather of fantasy art, and then you have him doing the covers for Robert E. Howard, who is arguably the grandfather of the sword and sorcery genre. And it was around the same time too where all those writers, there's obviously some years difference, but like writers like Edgar Rice Burroughs and H.P. Lovecraft and all these writers back at the time all kind of knew each other's works and stuff like that. Even so, where Robert E. Howard, there are two mega volumes. I can't remember the name of it, but it's basically the letters of H.P. Lovecraft writing to Robert E. Howard and vice versa. And a lot of it is just talking about the politics of the day, or what it takes to go on like trips back then. Howard lived in basically the center of Texas, and any of Texas is a pretty big state. There's always the joke that you could drive across the United States and what is it, 7 days or 6 days, and then 5 of them are driving through Texas. But yeah, one of the things I just did recently was I had made a trip to Cross Plains, Texas, to visit the Robert E. Howard home, and it's his home where he wrote and came up with all these characters that he did. I got to see his room. I got to see actual typewritten pages that he had done. It was just so cool seeing all that and being able to go see a place where a person who was so inspiring in my artistic path, seeing the small little house that he lived in and him having to write on typewriters. I mean, that's crazy for us nowadays, but it was just very inspiring. And it was, if you have not had a chance to check out check out the Conan comics for sure. There's some good ones, there's some bad ones, but the ones in the early 70s and 80s, those are the heyday. So check out some writing by Robert E. Howard, check out some Conan comics, and start walking that blood-stained path with the favorite son of Samaria, Conan. Anyways, that's it, Pandawans. Keep your sword sharp and your pixels and pens and all that at your side, because you never know when you're going to be inspired to create. ABC, Pandawans, always be creating. Hail!